As they say, heavy is the crown. When you lead a major college football program and you're being paid millions of dollars to deliver wins, and the colors of that school are adored by millions of people, alumni, fans, boosters that want to win and win badly so that they can have bragging rights. Yes, you are either adored or you are scorned. You need to deliver wins and championships, and you better do it soon. We are going to deliver for you 8 coaches on the hot seat for 2021 and then 3 wild cards, because keep in mind that each off season, the day after the regular season ends or bowl play, what happens? There are a couple coaches that get fired that we didn't expect, that are complete surprises, because either their team went completely off the rails after they had a decent run at that particular school, or the administration just not happy with them. There may be some relationships there that aren't working. And so even though the win-loss record isn't horrible, the administration goes in another direction because that coach is not meeting expectations, plus the relationships and the support just not there. All right, let's get to the likely candidates, and let's start out west in the Pac-12. And let's go to Los Angeles for 2. USC's Clay Helton, of course. He came to the school in 2015, and I believe that many of you would be surprised at Clay Helton's record. It's been good. It's been top 15 to 25 in the nation good. He's winning 75% of his games in the Pac-12, and he took a team to the Rose Bowl, won the Rose Bowl, finished number 3 in the country in 2016 after a rough start after that blowout loss to Alabama. They righted the ship, and of course he did win the Rose Bowl, finished number 3 in the country, followed by a Pac-12 championship season in 2017. However, the standard at USC is to compete for national championships, and we're going on year number 7, and Clay Helton has not come close to that. The number 3 ranking was because of a late surge. USC was never in competition for a national championship that season. What looks bad for USC is that, yes, they are competitive, they are decent, but that's not the standard. They play in arguably the worst division in college football. They should completely dominate that division and own the Pac-12 South and play in the conference championship game every year, or 4 out of 5 years. Basically, every year they should be playing in the conference championship game, and that conference championship game appearance should be made with 0, 1, or 2 losses, and most of the time competing for a college football playoff appearance. Clay Helton has recruited well for the most part. He's had a couple seasons in which it's been a complete shock as to why USC did not recruit that particular year. He had a recruiting finish in the 50s a couple years ago, but generally in the top 5 to 10 in the nation, they have the talent. All right, they don't have the depth of talent, but they've got star players on both sides of the ball, especially on offense, to get the job done, especially in that conference. The bad portion of all of this is that the Pac-12 is down, and USC still can't win it decidedly every year. And that is arguably the worst conference in college football. The path to the playoff is pretty wide for USC, and they're not taking advantage. And we see them fail time and time again under Clay Helton on the big stage against the better teams. They play Notre Dame every year, and most of the time they lose, and they've been embarrassed a number of times. Embarrassed, as I mentioned, against Alabama to open 2016, manhandled by Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. When they match up against elite competition or near elite top 10 competition outside the Pac-12, they typically fail. Clay Helton needs to win double-digit games and win a Pac-12 championship, most likely, to keep his job. Let's stay in Los Angeles for Chip Kelly and UCLA. Chip Kelly is looked upon by College Football Nation right now as a failure, as a mediocre coach who doesn't communicate to his team, who doesn't look like he's really inspired, whose innovations look outdated. All right, much of that could be true, although his team did play much better despite the 3-4 record last season. Chip Kelly's first 2 seasons at UCLA could not have gone worse for a number of reasons. He first of all selected a quarterback who did not fit his system in Wilton Speight out of Michigan. He gets a transfer quarterback from Michigan who's a stable, steady, dependable quarterback, but can't run the offense that Chip Kelly wants to run. All right, Dorian Thompson Robinson's development has been marginal at best, and that's on Chip Kelly, as an offensive guru and quarterback developer. I think we forget how dominant his teams were at Oregon. They owned the Pac-12. His record at Oregon was astounding, 33-3 in the conference, and the Pac-12 was a much better conference then, as he had to compete with a top 5 to 10 Stanford team on an annual basis. His teams went 46-7. He came that close to winning a national championship in 2010, just seconds away from going to overtime. But Chip Kelly at UCLA, it's been bad. It was better last season, although the wins didn't come through. He could have used that win against USC with a 2-score lead in the fourth quarter, but UCLA blew it. Chip Kelly needs to win 6 or 7 games, go to a bowl game, and show themselves that they can compete in the Pac-12 South. And a down year for USC again would not hurt his cause because, of course, that comparison is always going to be made. Consider that UCLA fired Jim Mora. What did Jim Mora do? He went 10-3 and finished in the top 10 one season. He also won 8 or 9 games the rest of the other seasons. They typically went 8-4 range and were competitive in decent bowl games under Jim Mora. Now, he didn't deliver to the point that many of us expected, but UCLA was a fringe top 25 team during his tenure. And again, he had a top 10 finish there at UCLA. So Chip Kelly, get to a bowl game, be competitive against the better teams in the Pac-12. 6-6, 7-5 will save your job. All right, let's move on to the Big Ten and the one. Jim Harbaugh. Let's set the record straight. This guy's been an exceptional head coach at all the other stops in his career, both in the NFL and in college. I'm not going to go into the details here. I have ad nauseum in other videos and live streams. It is not hard to defend Jim Harbaugh's legacy at other schools and in the NFL, the San Francisco 49ers, with the 4th best winning percentage in the history of the NFL. Okay, he comes to Michigan, and it, much like another coach we're going to talk about soon, it looked like the perfect situation. A favored son who excelled as a player, who was just considered a Michigan man, a man of that school, of that legacy, who had succeeded so well at other stops. So, of course, he's going to take all the resources, the tradition, the brand, the image at Michigan and win big. And through 2015 and 16, it looked like Jim Harbaugh was on the right track. Look at what he brought Michigan football in those first 2 seasons after the mediocre play at best, to be kind, under Rich Rodriguez and Brady Hoke. Hoke was better than Rich Rod, but they were pretty much a 500 tandem over that course of years from 2008 through 14. But Jim Harbaugh steps in, and they immediately go into the top 10 in the nation for 2 consecutive years. Came within that close of beating Ohio State, of course, in 2016. That was a fork in the road, of course. They would have gone to the college football playoff most likely with a different measurement against Ohio State. The 2017 season was a disappointment at 8-5 and blown leads all over the place, including in the bowl game against South Carolina, up by 16 points. Okay. That 2018 season, another turning point because Michigan football was dominant, and in comparison to Ohio State leading into the game, they were the best team. They were the better team than Ohio State clearly over the course of the season, but they got blasted head-to-head. All right, he's 0 for everything against Ohio State. 5 consecutive losses to the Buckeyes, the last 2 in embarrassing fashion. I think it's getting overblown how far the Michigan program has fallen. The only results that we have to show that the Michigan program has fallen off that much are the 6 games from last season. This was a team that went 9-3 2 years ago, that played relatively well and took Alabama into the fourth quarter in the bowl game. They were still a top 15 team 2 years ago. Okay, yes, the signs were not good last year, 2-4, but that's a half a season. So it's difficult to evaluate. We know that they wouldn't have done any better than 8-4. So it was not a good look. It was not a good season. And there are indications that they're going off the rails. Now, he's taken some risks involving the coaching staff. We will see if they pay off. Michigan is still recruiting at a high level. And Michigan fans, the Michigan Nation, may be If they don't get one of the top coaches in the country, i.e. Matt Campbell, may be just as frustrated, if not more, 5 years from now if they let Jim Harbaugh go. But it's just not a good vibe, a good look. It's just reeks of disappointment and failure right now for Jim Harbaugh. He's got to have an outstanding record this season in 2021, or he needs to win key games. So, for example, if they go 8-3 going into the Ohio State game, but he pulls off a miraculous win over the Buckeyes, and the Buckeyes are the best team in the Big Ten, and still go on to the Big Ten championship, that might save his job. So it's not just a win total, it's within context. He could go 9-3 and get completely obliterated by Ohio State, Penn State, and Wisconsin, and lose his job because they're just showing that they're not competitive. The last several games against Wisconsin, Michigan has been embarrassed. 49-11 at home last year. That is coming off a 35-14 game that wasn't that close the year before against Wisconsin. So he's got to beat the teams that are better in the Big Ten that he was beating a few years ago when they were off to a good start in 2015 and 16. Now he's losing to Wisconsin and Penn State. He lost at home to Penn State this past year, and of course they lost the year before in Happy Valley. So he's starting to rack up losses against not just Ohio State, but the better teams in the Big Ten. Jim Harbaugh, within context, either go 9-3 with breakthrough wins, or you've got to just win big, 10-1, 10-2, 11-1, or you're gone, you're history. That would be my call right there. The standard is high at Michigan, and it should be. Jim Harbaugh, of course, not delivering to that degree. Good football coach, or maybe he was a good football coach. We will see. Much like the Michigan situation is the situation at Nebraska and Scott Frost. Favored son won a national championship with the Huskers, of course, as the quarterback. He goes to Oregon. He's considered an offensive mind because of what he did with the Ducks there. Then he goes to UCF, and of course he pulls off a miracle of taking over a program that went 0-12 and turning them around to 13-0. Beats Auburn in a bowl game, heads off to Nebraska to, of course, fix what Mike Riley and his predecessors could not and bring Nebraska back to prominence in the Big Ten and in the nation. All right, Mike Riley went to bowl games. Mike Riley was in that 8-4 range most of his tenure. His final season was 5-7. He got fired. Okay, Scott Frost has been given a lot of leash here. The first season, I thought that there was some promise there because, of course, he was in the process of changing culture, locker room, terminology, structure, building a brand, building the program. Okay, you expect to take a few steps back before you go forward. That's understandable. Nebraska started 0-6 his first campaign. They finished strong, 4-2, and two of the losses, those two losses were against really good Ohio State and Iowa teams. The Buckeyes in the top 3 in the nation, Iowa a top 15 team, and he lost at the wire both games. Okay, improvement was right there to see in the latter half of that first season under Scott Frost. Then they didn't come through the next season. Another awful season in year 2, and then in year 3, of course, was the pandemic, the shortened season, and Nebraska continues to falter against the likes of Illinois and Northwestern. That should not happen. So Scott Frost is sitting on a dismal record right now of 12-20, 9-17 in the Big Ten, and he plays in the West Division. And against the elite of the Big Ten, i.e. Ohio State, they've been completely embarrassed outside of that first effort in year 1. The last 2 years could have been named the score. All right, Scott Frost has a difficult schedule to deal with. Oklahoma outside of the conference, they got to meet Ohio State again. The Big Ten Western Division has suddenly become very competitive. Minus an elite team, it's extremely balanced with strong programs. Minnesota Northwestern, Wisconsin, Iowa, of course. So Nebraska's got a difficult schedule. They also take on one of the other better teams. Michigan, yes, in the Big Ten Eastern Division. Okay. Nebraska's been so bad under Scott Frost in the last year under Mike Riley that what's improvement? Well, they've got to get to a bowl game. Get 6-6, 6-6, And maybe if they get embarrassed in the bowl game, he still gets let go. But to go 6-6 and be competitive, or of course win the bowl game, go 7-6. I think that's the formula for Nebraska football. Get to postseason play. They can't go 6 years not going to postseason play, and it's going to be 4 years under Scott Frost, no postseason play. Get to a bowl game. All right, let's stay in the Big Ten and go to Purdue and Jeff Brom. Interesting case here because he looked to be a tremendous hire when he first landed in West Lafayette. He comes from Western Kentucky, offensive mind, offensive guru. Of course, he was a quarterback himself. Purdue instantly recruited better under him, brought in Rondell Moore is, of course, the poster child for the improvement in recruiting, but other offensive players in particular. But if you look deeper, you see that Purdue excelled in context, meaning that they were not a good football program, of course, under Danny Hazel before Jeff Brom. So just getting to bowl games and winning that first bowl game against Arizona was a tremendous improvement. But it was on the defensive side. The defense played well. The offense not necessarily up to speed. And then in the next season, they pull off the big win against Ohio State that took a lot of attention, that Purdue was on the rise and Jeff Brom. But it was a 6-7 season in which they were blown out time and time again. And they did pull off some decent wins in addition to Ohio State in the Big Ten, but Auburn obliterated them. They still showed that they were far, far away from being a competitive team in a tough league. Okay, overall, they could pull off the big win or have a couple games like that over the course of 12 games, but overall weren't close to that. They were still a top 45 or 50 team in the nation. They were not going to compete seriously for a division championship to get to Indianapolis. Okay, so 6-7 the second season after 7-6, and then down the tubes. I believe it's 6-12. Yes, couple seasons at let's make it 8-16 since the Ohio State game, and 4-8, 2-4 the last 2 years. Again, much like the Scott Frost narrative at Nebraska, Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Bottom out during the pandemic year, not many games played, so it's difficult to evaluate. But again, we know that they weren't going to have an outstanding season in 2020 because in the few games that they played, they did not look good, and they played better football at the beginning and tired down the stretch. So much like Scott Frost, Jeff Brom get to a bowl game. Winning season, get to a bowl game. 7-5, 6-6, look good in the bowl game. You keep your job at Purdue. All right, let's move on to the ACC and Justin Fuente, Virginia Tech. Justin Fuente got off to a nice start with the Hokies, and we know what the standard is there that Frank Beamer established. Frank Beamer consistently finished in the top 10 to 15 in the nation until his final 4 to 5 years, when Virginia Tech fell off to more of a 7 or 8 win program. But Frank Beamer built the football tradition at Virginia Tech. Justin Fuente takes over, and the first 2 seasons were strong. They were roughly top 15 finishes. They went to an ACC championship game, competed against Clemson, and he was off to a 21-8 start. Since then, sub 500 for Justin Fuente, 17-18. Okay, that's 3 seasons of games. And Justin Fuente's under 500. That's not acceptable at Virginia Tech. And the recruiting has been dismal, awful, near the worst in the ACC. So that does not bode well for the future. The evaluation of these coaches should have nothing to do with recruiting unless the losses are mounting, plus you're seeing recruiting not developed, not improved, then it means something. Case in point, Wisconsin can recruit in the 35 to 40 range, go out and deliver top 10 to 15 teams in the nation, and you're not going to be concerned about the recruiting ranking. But at Virginia Tech, when you finish under 500 over the course of 3 seasons, and your recruiting's awful for the last couple cycles, which does not bode well for your junior and senior classes coming up, plus you're not recruiting well right now, in the 21 and 22 cycles, well, it could get awfully ugly for Virginia Tech and Justin Fuente. he's got to go 8-4. I think he needs to really deliver a solid season, and that should not be too much to ask at Virginia Tech. 8-4 was pretty much the floor for Frank Beamer for the most part in 25 to 30 years at Virginia Tech once he established the program. Okay, Justin Fuente, that's your standard. All right, let's move on to, let's stay in the ACC. Dino Babers, a very likable guy, a guy that gains a lot of respect. You never hear anything negative about Dino Babers. He impresses people, and he's got a difficult job winning at Syracuse, but it can be done. Pasqualoni did it. McPherson did it. Even Doug Marrone, to a certain extent, recently got them to the 7-5 range going to bowl games. Okay. 5 to 10 years ago, Dino Babers takes over, and it's been awful, excluding one season. They go 10-3 in 2018. They win a bowl game over West Virginia, which was compromised with no Will Grier and their best offensive players. That season was a good season. I'm going to credit them. They went out and won the games 10-3, but smoke and mirrors. If you really look at that season, when they played anybody with a pulse, they got blown out. And they were able to beat all the beatable teams on the schedule. So credit to Dino Babers for the 10-3. And before that, a monumental win against Virginia Tech and a even more monumental win at home against a top 3 Clemson team. But those two seasons resulted in 4-8. His record is awful. 1-10 last season, of course. 6-17 since the big 10-3 finish, 3-15 in the ACC. Again, he's 1-10. Look at the schedule, and you see an opportunity for Syracuse to win some football games. So if they can't against that schedule, they typically don't play anybody outside the conference unless Notre Dame pops up, courtesy the ACC contract. So Dino Babers, get to a bowl game. 6-6. Get to a bowl game, save your job at Syracuse. All right, let's go to the SEC. And the oddest coach and the oddest season in college football in 2020 belong to the Florida Gators. If you would have told me prior to 2020 that the Florida Gators would beat Georgia, win the SEC Eastern Division, and considering that Alabama was clearly the best team in college football, give Alabama their toughest test of the season, along with Ole Miss, Rebel fans, I won't forget, I would have said, okay, that's a great accomplishment. They finally got past Georgia. They beat them head-to-head. They challenged Alabama, the best team in the country, unlike anybody else. Okay. But then came playing Darth Vader. And playing Darth Vader when you're winning and not doing other stupid things isn't a big deal. But you look like a clown when you play the clown the rest of the time, too. So it just fits the narrative. The Missouri debacle, where he runs out onto the field and does nothing positive to correct a bad situation. Okay. Texas A&M, he complains about the crowd noise with 22,000 in the stands because they lost. So that's a bad look. You look like a whiny baby. And then the end of the season was awful. The shoe throw, so not his fault. His responsibility, he's accountable for that as the head coach. It comes under his reign, but he can't control what players do. So it was an idiotic move by Marco Wilson. And but Dan Mullen did not accept it, take accountability for it. He had a very odd response after the game about he didn't necessarily see what happened. Okay. And then the entire preparation for the Cotton Bowl, the game itself, and the comments made afterward, completely unacceptable for a big-time head coach. Take responsibility. Look at what was going on in Miami at the Orange Bowl with Mac Brown and North Carolina taking on one of the top 5 teams in the country without their 2 running backs, 2 of the best in the nation, without their 2 best receivers, without their best defensive player, the guy that was by far and away their best defender. And Mac Brown didn't say anything about it. He got his team ready and prepared to play. They lost. They were competitive, though. They fought to the end. They took it down to the wire the last minute or so of the game. It was a one-score game. He didn't complain. And you know what happens? People evaluate that as understanding. Okay, they lost the game, but they didn't have X, Y, and Z. So it's understandable. They still went out there, competed like a program with pride. Dan Mullen made excuses before the game because he knew that they were going to get throttled. Okay, we understand. Had Florida showed up, prepared for that game, prepared for it like a postseason game, a Cotton Bowl that basically College Football Nation is watching. Regardless of your evaluation and perspective on bowl games, people watch the bowl games, especially when they are New Year's Six games. That's the only college football you can watch. Everybody's watching. So regardless of where you place it in terms of importance, it is important in terms of perspective and the optics. And if they would have fought, scratched and clawed, and even lost by 20 points, people would have understood, okay, they're missing their best players. They lost by a couple touchdowns, 3 touchdowns to a really good team. Okay, it's understandable. But no, they got embarrassed. And then he made more excuses after the game. Dan Mullen, I think needs to be in that 9-3 range. They've got 3 possible, probable losses: Alabama, LSU, Georgia. And then they should beat everybody else. But certainly Missouri in particular is capable of beating them. And so they've got to deal with Missouri and Kentucky, 2 teams that could beat them, that they are, the Gators, better than. But if this gets to the 7-5 range, I think Mullen's gone. 8-4, he probably gets a pass, and they, unless he does stupid things off the field. So I'm just talking football here on the field and results. 8-4 probably saves his job, but I wouldn't be surprised if he gets shown the door. Got to be 9-3 or better. And of course, Florida wants to win the SEC Eastern Division, and that should be the goal, to get to the title game in Atlanta. They're most likely not going to do that. I don't think they've got the squad to do it this year, but that should be the aim and the goal. So the one appearance in the championship game, great, but that is not going to hold up for 7-8 years. Dan Mullen, win or else. All right, 3 wild cards. Matt Wells at Texas Tech. He comes from Utah State, where he had a nice stay there at his alma mater. He comes to Texas Tech, and he's 8-14. Many people would think, okay, well, Texas Tech is always awful. They're not. Mike Leach showed that you can win at Texas Tech. He won 65% of his games. He finished in the top 25. Imagine this now. In 2020, 2021, Texas Tech finishing in the top 25. We'd all be pretty surprised. Mike Leach did that 5 of his final 6 seasons in Lubbock. And Matt Wells is not coming through at this point. It's year number 3. So if they have an especially bad season, he might be gone. Again, these are wild cards that aren't necessarily being talked about. Justin Wilcox at Cal. I think he's a tremendous coach. On the defensive side, he's considered one of the best. And Cal, before I looked at these numbers, it was in my head that Cal had improved under Justin Wilcox. But they're 11-20 in the Pac-12. In a bad conference, they're only winning 33% of the games. In a bad conference with gimme wins. Justin Wilcox needs to come through. It's year 5. They've got talent there. They need to go 8-4. Or he may be looking for a job. And finally, my other wild card is Mike Norvell at Florida State. You say, well, he just started. He had a pandemic year at 3-6. I totally understand. I think that the pandemic, though difficult for every coaching staff in the country, of course, hit the first-year head coaches much harder for obvious reasons. You can't communicate to your team. You're trying to establish a culture in a program, and you can't do it. It's difficult to do, I should say, with all the barriers. And this might be a situation in which there are steps taken backward before you can go forward, because Jimbo Fisher left them in a bad place. The program was starting to falter already. Willie Taggart was awful. And now Mike Norvell's off to a bad start. 3-6 doesn't even in any way depict how bad they were last year. outside of a shocking win against North Carolina. Awful play out of Florida State. Just not competitive against even bad teams like Louisville, who went 4-7 and beat Florida State by 32 points. Not competitive against a team like Pitt at home. So Florida State, it's not expected that he's going to go 10-2 this year. The schedule is by far the most difficult schedule in the ACC. They are playing 5 teams that it would be a huge lift to defeat any of these teams. Florida, Notre Dame outside the conference, Clemson, Miami, and North Carolina. It would be good of him to steal one of those games, at least one, and be competitive in most of them. Not everyone. They're going to get blown out by somebody, most likely Clemson and a few other teams. I got to think, get to a bowl game. Go 6-6, get to a bowl game. But with that schedule, it's going to be difficult. Vegas has the over-under at 5.5, and I think that's right there. Florida State, Mike Norvell. It could be an early firing. They did it to Willie Taggart. They paid off Willie Taggart. They may not be able to do it with Mike Norvell. That may be the point in all this, when with a number of situations, could be money keeping some guys around past 2021, even if they don't meet expectations. All right, my 8 coaches on the hot seat that are pretty much being talked about across the country, but my 3 wild cards as well. Your thoughts down below, right below. And please like the video, share the videos out on social media, because if you enjoy the discussion, debate, and analysis, others will as well. So please share the videos, like the videos, get them out there, keep us going right here at the Voice of College Football. See you next time.